Zach, thank you. President Obama is trying to talk Israel down, that is, from threats of war with Iran. For the past 3 years, he's been pressuring Iran with sanctions, which the president says have been crippling. The U.S. and European allies say they're willing to sit down at the negotiating table with Iran. Now, the president says with Tehran saying it's willing to let nuclear inspectors back in, it shows that there is a change for peace.
See if this can be resolved in a peaceful fashion. So this notion that somehow we have a choice to make in the next week or 2 weeks or month or 2 months is not borne out by the facts.
So Israeli leaders say we're just wasting our time. They're worried diplomacy is allowing Iran to stall military action. So joining us this morning, Dr. Alan Kuperman is here from the LBJ School of Public Affairs to talk about the situation with Iran and Israel. Now, we know that Benjamin Netanyahu recently visited the president. What came out of that meeting, and where do we stand now with U.S. involvement?
I think that the way the stories read is that they had reached some sort of agreement, but I don't think that they reached any sort of agreement. They agreed to disagree.
Yeah, because they spent a couple hours in the Oval Office, closed-door meeting, and you kind of wonder what comes out of that. And they come out with a very united front, it seems like, but Netanyahu was pretty steadfast in what he said.
Well, from Israel's perspective, I was there about a year ago talking about this sort of stuff with Israeli leaders, and from their perspective, the threat to them is greater than the threat to the United States, and their capability to take military action is less. Than that of the United States. And so the situation is much more urgent for them. They see what they call a small window of opportunity for Iran either to cease its nuclear program or for Israel to take military action to destroy or set back that nuclear program.
Do you feel that Israel would lean toward the offensive in this case?
Well, sure. Then, as I say, they see this very short timeline. They think that within a few months, Iran would cross this threshold where they would be immune from attack from Israel. And so, and moreover, if Iran were to get a nuclear weapon, Israel sees that as what they call an existential threat, that 1 or 2 nukes could essentially destroy Israel. And so they see a need for something has to happen in the next couple months. Either Iran has to stop its nuclear program or Israel has to take military action to stop its nuclear program. But for President Obama, it's a much longer timeline. First of all, even if Iran got a nuke, could they deliver it to the United States? Probably not anytime soon. And secondly, we have these munitions that can burrow down very deep and destroy buried facilities. So the threat to us isn't as urgent, and we have a longer timeline for taking military action. And that's why they essentially agreed to disagree, with Obama saying, don't worry, I have your back. If you're ever threatened, the U.S. will protect you. And Netanyahu saying, thanks, but no thanks. From Israel's perspective, we're going to protect ourselves. And that means either Iran stops or we take military action in the next few months. He might be bluffing.
Yeah, and what do you think about Iran saying that, okay, we'll allow these inspectors in to take a look, but then others will say, well, this is just a ploy to buy more time? Well,
I mean, they have regular inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency. And now they've agreed to go into these talks with these six countries, the UN Security Council, permanent members, and Germany. And from Israel's perspective, this is just Iran stalling so that it can get to this point where its nuclear program is immune from Israeli attack.
And they think that because they've said it, they've seen this before, right? How many times has
since 2003?
Right.
Since 2003, we're talking 9 years. They've seen this thing, and since there was a very short pause by Iran in enrichment, and since then, for now about 7 years or so, there's been constant enrichment of uranium by Iran. Sometimes they talk, sometimes they don't talk, but the enrichment continues. The rate of enrichment continues. They now have enough modestly enriched uranium that if they enriched it just a little more, they'd have enough for 2 nuclear weapons. And that's Israel's concern. And they say, well, yes, there are inspectors going in, but Iran is continuing to proceed towards a nuclear weapon with the inspectors there. And then all they have to do is once they have enough highly enriched uranium, they can say, bye-bye, inspectors, and then they have a nuclear weapon, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it at that point. That's the nightmare scenario from Israel's perspective, and that's why they see a very short window. Something has to be done in the next few months.
Very interesting. I was also talking to Dr. Kuperman about the Syria situation, and you said you're actually writing a paper on this right now.
Yeah, well, comparing Syria to Libya, what's interesting is that in Libya, there really wasn't a great humanitarian crisis when we decided to intervene, and things actually got worse. More people died after we intervened than before we intervened. Whereas in Syria, you have a true humanitarian crisis.
Right.
You have thousands upon thousands of people being killed, mainly civilians, mainly peaceful protesters. So the humanitarian demand is stronger in Syria, but it's much more complicated from a geopolitical perspective, from a national interest perspective. You have Al-Qaeda in there. You have a chance of spillover of war to Lebanon, spillover of war to Iraq, and, of course, to neighboring Israel. So the humanitarian need is greater in Syria, but I don't think we're going to do anything anytime soon.
Well, and it's going to be interesting to see what the U.S. involvement might be, because now they are talking about possible military action against Syria. So,
well, President Obama has asked the Pentagon to start preparing options. And I can tell you that the Pentagon does not want to do this, but the Pentagon didn't want to do Libya either.
Right.
So it's not up to the Pentagon. We have a civilian command of the military in this country.
You know what? You need to come back. We'll talk about Syria. We'll make it another segment, all right?
Okay, I'd love that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. It's
Thank
good
you.
to see you again. All right, we'll be right back.